The morning sun cast long shadows across the map room in the Führer bunker as Adolf Hitler studied the latest intelligence reports from the Western Front. It was early 1944, and the German dictator's face twisted into a rare smile as he examined photographs smuggled from Allied training grounds in England. The grainy images showed what appeared to be large canvas sheets being inflated into the crude shapes of military vehicles. Is this what the Americans plan to defeat the Reich with? Balloon tanks? Hitler asked, his voice dripping with contempt. The gathered officers joined in his laughter, relieved to see the Führer in good spirits amid the increasingly dire war situation. General Alfred Jodl, Hitler's chief of operations, dismissed the images as evidence of Allied desperation. They know they cannot match our panzers in quality, so they resort to tricks and deceptions, Jodl remarked confidently. The photographs were filed away, considered little more than a curiosity, certainly nothing that warranted serious military concern. Across the English Channel, in a secluded training facility near Salisbury Plain, the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were not manufacturing toys or engaging in frivolous exercises. They were rehearsing for what would become one of the most audacious deception operations in military history. Colonel Harry L. Reeder addressed the unusual collection of recruits assembled before him. Artists, actors, sound engineers, and set designers pulled from Broadway theaters, advertising agencies, and Hollywood studios. "Gentlemen," Reeder announced, "conventional wisdom says wars are won with bullets and bombs. We intend to prove that wars can also be won with imagination and illusion." The unit, soon to be known informally as the Ghost Army, represented a radical approach to tactical deception. Their mission was not to engage the enemy directly, but to deceive, mislead, and manipulate German intelligence through an elaborate combination of visual, sonic, and radio deception. The origins of the Ghost Army concept had taken shape months earlier in the offices of Army headquarters in London. Colonel Billy Harris, a military planner with a background in theater production, had proposed the creation of a special unit dedicated entirely to battlefield deception. "The Germans have a methodical approach to intelligence gathering," Harris explained to skeptical superior officers. "They observe, they count, they calculate. What if we gave them something false to observe, count, and calculate?" The proposal had gained traction after British success with deception operations in North Africa, where inflatable tanks had successfully fooled German reconnaissance planes. But what Harris envisioned went far beyond simple dummy equipment. He proposed a comprehensive, multi-layered deception capability that could simulate the presence of an entire army division, tens of thousands of troops, where only a few hundred actually existed. The recruitment process for this unusual military unit targeted skills that would have been considered irrelevant in conventional warfare. Art students from the Pratt Institute and the Philadelphia Museum School of Industrial Art found themselves receiving unexpected draft notices directing them to a classified program. Bill Blass, who would later become a famous fashion designer, was among those selected for his visual skills. Ellsworth Kelly, who would emerge as one of America's greatest abstract artists after the war, joined the unit for his understanding of color and form. Sound engineers who had created radio dramas and filmmakers with experience in special effects were quietly approached. The military established a unique training facility where these creative minds learned the art of military deception, not just how to create convincing dummy tanks and artillery pieces, but how to stage them in ways that would appear authentic to enemy reconnaissance. The technology behind the Ghost Army's deception was both simple and ingenious. The inflatable equipment, designed by artists and engineers working in collaboration, included Sherman tanks, 105mm howitzers, and even 40-ton heavy tank destroyers. These were not mere balloon shapes, but carefully crafted replicas, complete with accurate details that would be visible from aerial reconnaissance. Made from rubber and canvas, a fake Sherman tank could be inflated in under 30 minutes, weighed just 93 pounds, and could be easily transported and deployed by 4 men. From a distance of a few hundred yards, and especially from the air, these dummies appeared remarkably convincing. The deception extended to creating tracks in the earth that would suggest the movement of heavy vehicles, while real tanks were sometimes driven through the area to leave authentic tread marks before moving on to their actual destinations. Sound played a crucial role in the Ghost Army's deception operations. A team led by former radio sound effects experts developed what they called sonic deception, powerful speaker systems mounted on half-tracks that could broadcast pre-recorded sounds of military activity. These 500-pound speakers could project sound up to 15 miles and were used to simulate the distinctive audio signatures of different military units. The sound engineers meticulously recorded actual Army units in training, the rumble of tank engines, the distinctive clatter of track vehicles, the shouts of soldiers, and the sounds of construction. These recordings were then mixed and amplified to create the auditory illusion of large forces assembling, moving, or preparing for operations. During nighttime operations, when German reconnaissance relied heavily on listening posts, these sonic deceptions proved particularly effective. Radio deception formed the third pillar of the Ghost Army's strategy. The unit included radio operators who were trained to impersonate the radio operators of actual combat units. They studied the distinctive transmission patterns, terminology, and even the Morse code FIST, the unique rhythm and timing of genuine operators. Once they could convincingly mimic these characteristics, they established fake radio networks that precisely duplicated the communications of the units they were impersonating. German signal intelligence, which meticulously monitored Allied radio traffic, would intercept these transmissions and be led to believe that specific units were present in the Ghost Army's location, when those real units were actually being deployed elsewhere. The signals deception, codenamed Operation Spoof, became so sophisticated that it could simulate the radio traffic of an entire army. Of course, the Ghost Army's first significant deployment came in the wake of the D-Day landings in Normandy. As Allied forces struggled to expand their foothold in France, the need to stretch and confuse German defensive resources became crucial. The 23rd was sent to the Normandy front in June 1944, where they conducted their initial deception operation. Positioned near the town of Brest, they created the illusion of the 6th Armored Division preparing for an attack, complete with inflatable tanks partially hidden under camouflage netting. Deliberately poor camouflage, designed to be spotted, simulated radio traffic, and the sounds of an armored division at rest, idling engines, clanking equipment, and the murmur of hundreds of soldiers. German reconnaissance reported the presence of significant armored forces, causing the German command to divert resources to counter a threat that didn't actually exist, while the real 6th Armored Division struck elsewhere along the front. The success of the Normandy operation led to the Ghost Army being deployed with increasing frequency and boldness. By August 1944, as Allied forces broke out of Normandy and began the liberation of France, the 23rd's reputation among senior commanders grew. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, recognized the unit's potential for strategic deception. These men can make the Germans think an entire army is going left when we're actually going right, Bradley reportedly commented after reviewing reports of the Ghost Army's effectiveness. The unit was often deployed to simulate the presence of much larger forces at key strategic points, drawing German attention and resources away from the actual Allied main effort. Their operations became increasingly sophisticated, with deceptions sometimes maintained for days or even weeks, requiring the Ghost Army soldiers to constantly adjust their illusions to maintain credibility. One of the Ghost Army's most audacious operations took place during the Allied advance toward the German border in September 1944. The unit was tasked with simulating 2 entire divisions or approximately 30,000 troops, with their actual strength of just 1,100 men. Positioned near the town of Metz in northeastern France, they created the illusion of a massive force preparing for a major offensive. The deception involved more than 500 inflatable vehicles, round-the-clock sonic broadcasts, dozens of fake radio networks, and even the establishment of phony headquarters complete with military police checkpoints and signage. German reconnaissance pilots reported large troop concentrations, and local German commanders responded by repositioning significant defensive forces to counter the perceived threat. Meanwhile, the actual Allied thrust came nearly 50 miles away, encountering fewer defenders than anticipated and achieving substantial territorial gains with minimal casualties. As the Allied forces approached the Rhine River in early 1945, the Ghost Army faced their most challenging assignment. Operation Viersen called for them to simulate the U.S. 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions along a 10-mile stretch of the Rhine near Dusseldorf. creating the impression that the Allied crossing would occur there rather than at the actual location 12 miles north. The scale of the deception was unprecedented. Hundreds of inflatable vehicles, over 600 fake radio transmissions per day, and continuous sonic broadcasts created the impression of two divisions assembling for a major river crossing. To enhance the illusion, Ghost Army personnel drove jeeps and trucks in loops between various locations, stirring up dust and creating the traffic patterns consistent with a large military buildup. They established fake supply dumps with real, but empty, crates and fuel containers. German observation posts across the Rhine reported exactly what the Ghost Army wanted them to see: a massive force preparing for an imminent crossing attempt. The effectiveness of Operation Viersen became clear on March 24, 1945, when the actual Rhine crossing took place far from where the Ghost Army had suggested it would occur. German forces, positioned to defend against the Phantom crossing, were caught by surprise. The real 30th and 79th Divisions, along with British forces, crossed the Rhine against minimal opposition, suffering fewer than 200 casualties, a remarkably low number for such a significant operation. German prisoners later revealed that their commanders had been convinced the main Allied thrust would come where the Ghost Army was positioned. According to military historians, the deception likely saved thousands of Allied lives and accelerated the advance into Germany. After the successful Rhine crossing, Lieutenant General William Simpson of the Ninth Army specifically commended the 23rd, noting that their deception had been worth two divisions in terms of its strategic impact. By April 1945, as Allied forces pushed deep into Germany, reports of the Ghost Army's activities began to reach Hitler's headquarters. Intelligence officers presented evidence suggesting that many of the Allied force concentrations reported over the previous months had been elaborate deceptions. The Führer, who had once laughed at photographs of inflatable tanks, now flew into a rage upon realizing how thoroughly his forces had been fooled. "We have been chasing ghosts while the real enemy struck elsewhere," Hitler reportedly shouted during one of his increasingly erratic military briefings. The German High Command began a hasty reassessment of Allied strength and positions, but it was too late. The strategic initiative had been irretrievably lost, in part due to the constant misdirection created by the Ghost Army's Phantom divisions. German intelligence officers, once considered among the most meticulous in recording enemy order of battle,
had been systematically fed false information that undermined their ability to respond effectively to actual Allied movements. As the European war drew to a close,
the Ghost Army conducted its final operations in the Ruhr region, continuing to deceive German forces about Allied intentions, even as the Third Reich collapsed. The unit's existence remained highly classified, with its members sworn to secrecy about their unusual wartime role. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops had conducted more than 20 major deception operations, often operating just miles from the front lines. Their unorthodox approach to warfare had repeatedly fooled German intelligence and influenced enemy decision-making at crucial junctures in the campaign. Military analysts estimated that the Ghost Army's operations had significantly reduced Allied casualties and accelerated the defeat of Nazi Germany by drawing German forces away from actual Allied movements and creating confusion among enemy commanders about American intentions and capabilities. The story of the Ghost Army remained largely secret for decades after the war. The unit was officially deactivated in September 1945, with its records sealed and classified. Many of the artists, designers, and engineers who had served in the 23rd returned to civilian life and resumed creative careers, unable to share the full story of their wartime experiences, even with close family members. Bill Blass established his fashion empire without most people knowing of his role in designing camouflage patterns and fake military installations. Ellsworth Kelly became a renowned painter and sculptor, his wartime work in visual deception informing his later abstract compositions. The sonic deception specialists returned to radio and the emerging television industry, bringing with them advanced techniques in audio production developed during their Ghost Army service. It wasn't until 1996 that the unit's operations were declassified, allowing the full scope of their achievements to be recognized. The legacy of the Ghost Army extends far beyond World War II. The techniques pioneered by the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops established foundational principles, for military deception that remain relevant in modern warfare. Today's concepts of electronic warfare, psychological operations, and battlefield deception can trace their lineage directly to the innovations of this unique unit. Military historians now recognize that the Ghost Army represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare, one that measured success not in territory gained or casualties inflicted, but in the ability to manipulate enemy perceptions and decisions. The inflatable tanks that once prompted Hitler's derision had demonstrated that in modern warfare, deception could be as powerful as destruction, and that creativity and theatrical thinking had a place alongside conventional military doctrine. In the final analysis, the Ghost Army stands as a testament to American ingenuity and the unconventional thinking that characterized much of the Allied approach to World War II. These artists, actors and engineers, many of whom had never expected to serve in the military, applied their creative talents to the art of war and achieved remarkable results. Their story challenges conventional narratives about military heroism, demonstrating that courage and contribution in wartime took many forms. The men who inflated rubber tanks, broadcast phantom army sounds, and transmitted fake radio messages saved countless lives through deception rather than direct combat. The Ghost Army proved that sometimes the most effective weapon in warfare is not what the enemy sees, but what they think they see. A lesson that Hitler and the German High Command learned too late, as their forces were repeatedly deployed to confront armies that existed only as shadows and illusions in the creative minds of America's most unlikely soldiers. As the war in Europe concluded in May 1945, the Ghost Army's operations were abruptly halted, but their impact would reverberate far beyond the battlefields they had never actually fought upon. The unit received little public recognition as they prepared to return home. The nature of their work demanded continued secrecy. Colonel Reeder gathered his men for a final address at their encampment near Frankfurt. "What you have accomplished will not appear in headlines or history books," he told them. "You won't march in victory parades or receive combat medals. But make no mistake, your inflatable tanks and Phantom Division saved thousands of American lives. Remember that when you return to your drawing boards and sound stages." The men stood in silence, many reflecting on the peculiar nature of their service. Artists and creatives who had waged war not with bullets but with imagination. As the Ghost Army prepared for demobilization, military intelligence officers descended upon their equipment and records. The inflatable tanks, sonic projection systems, and radio deception playbooks were crated and shipped to secure military facilities. Operational reports were stamped with the highest classification levels. The soldiers were individually briefed about their ongoing obligation to maintain absolute secrecy regarding their activities. "As far as anyone is concerned, you served in a conventional military unit," the intelligence officers instructed. "The details of your actual work remain classified indefinitely." This secrecy would prove to be so effective that for nearly 5 decades, the Ghost Army's existence would remain virtually unknown outside a small circle of military planners who studied their techniques. Lieutenant Arthur Shilstone, one of the unit's talented illustrators, recalled an incident that encapsulated the surreal nature of their war experience. "We had set up a fake artillery position near the German border, complete with inflatable 150mm guns," Shilstone later wrote in his private memoirs. "2 French farmers wandered into our position, staring in confusion at what appeared to be heavy artillery pieces being lifted and moved by just 4 soldiers. One farmer turned to the other and said something like, 'The Americans are very strong.' We struggled not to laugh. Those guns would have required dozens of men and heavy equipment to move if they had been real." Such moments of absurdist humor punctuated the unit's deadly serious mission, creating a war experience unlike that of any other American soldiers. The Ghost Army's sonic deception capabilities had evolved considerably throughout the campaign. By 1945, their sound engineers had developed sophisticated multi-layered audio montages that could simulate specific military operations with remarkable fidelity. Captain David Tachman, who had worked in radio production before the war, oversaw the creation of these sonic tapestries. "We recorded the sounds of actual units. The distinctive engine noise of a Sherman tank column differs from that of a half-track convoy," Tachman explained in a classified post-war debriefing. "Then we created layered compositions that could be played back through our speaker systems to create a 3-dimensional audio illusion. We even accounted for atmospheric conditions and terrain features, adjusting our playback to sound authentic, whether in dense forest or open plains. These sonic deceptions were often so convincing that Allied units passing nearby would report enemy contacts, not realizing they were hearing the Ghost Army's broadcasts. The psychological aspects of the Ghost Army's operations were particularly fascinating to military analysts studying their effectiveness. Dr. Leonard Zuzna, a military psychologist attached to Army intelligence, compiled a classified report on the psychological principles that made the Ghost Army's deceptions successful. The German military mind was methodical and data-driven, Zuzna wrote. They relied heavily on quantifiable intelligence, counting tanks, measuring unit movements, triangulating radio transmissions. The brilliance of the Ghost Army was in exploiting this methodical approach by feeding precisely the kind of data the Germans trusted most. Rather than trying to hide information from the enemy, they provided false information in exactly the format the enemy expected to receive it. This represents a profound understanding of psychological manipulation in warfare. One of the Ghost Army's most effective but least documented techniques involved creating false military signatures through controlled physical evidence. Staff Sergeant Martin Blumberg, who had been a theatrical set designer before the war, led teams that manufactured what appeared to be the everyday detritus of military encampments, discarded ration cans with appropriate unit markings, cigarette packages of brands favored by specific divisions, mock latrines positioned according to standard military procedures, and even realistic tire tracks and tank treads created using specially designed rollers. When German reconnaissance teams or local informants observed these areas, the accumulated physical details created a compelling picture of major troop concentrations. We thought of ourselves as set dressers for the biggest show on earth, Blumberg later recalled in a rare 1985 interview conducted under still classified conditions. Every crushed cigarette pack and boot print was placed with purpose. The radio deception component of the Ghost Army's operations, codenamed Operation Spoof, represented one of the most sophisticated signals intelligence operations of the war. Lieutenant George Cantor, a radio engineer in civilian life, led teams of operators who became expert mimics of the radio transmission patterns of genuine units. Each radio operator has a distinctive rhythm when sending Morse code, what we call a fist, Cantor explained in a classified training document. We studied recordings of actual operators from the units we were impersonating until our men could reproduce their fists exactly. German signal intelligence was extremely thorough in cataloging these patterns, so our deception had to be perfect down to the individual. Keystroke timing. The Ghost Army's radio operators also mimicked the procedural errors and communication quirks of the units they impersonated, occasional missed acknowledgments, characteristic spelling mistakes, and even specific profanity usage to maintain the illusion of authenticity. The visual deception elements of the Ghost Army extended far beyond the now famous inflatable tanks. Captain Victor Dowd, who had been an advertising illustrator before the war, oversaw the creation of elaborate false headquarters complexes complete with convincingly painted signs, appropriate unit insignia, and carefully designed traffic patterns. We created an entire visual language for each Phantom division, Dowd noted in his operational reports. Everything from the way the MPs directed traffic to the positioning of headquarters tents was choreographed to match the actual units we were impersonating. The attention to detail was extraordinary. Genuine division commanders' vehicles with appropriately ranked license plates were simulated, and even laundry lines were hung with the correct proportions of officer and enlisted uniforms based on the unit's actual composition. The Ghost Army's work occasionally intersected with other Allied deception operations, creating layers of illusion that thoroughly confused German intelligence. One such collaboration occurred in the lead-up to Operation Market Garden in September 1944, when the Ghost Army coordinated with British deception units to create the impression of major armored forces preparing for a different axis of advance than the actual operation. Captain Ralph Ingersoll, a former publisher who served as a planning officer with the unit, later wrote in a confidential report, "We created a Phantom Ninth Army preparing for a thrust toward Aachen, while the British simulated additional forces near Antwerp." The actual operation, of course, targeted Arnhem. The Germans detected both deceptions, allocating defensive resources to counter threats that didn't exist. weakening their response to the actual airborne landings. This coordination of deception efforts across Allied forces represented a sophisticated approach to strategic misdirection. The men of the Ghost Army operated under constant tension. They needed to be convincing, enough to fool German reconnaissance, but not so convincing as to draw actual enemy attacks. This delicate balance was nearly broken during an operation near St. Lo in July 1944, when their simulation of an armored division was so effective that it attracted the attention of Luftwaffe reconnaissance, followed by a squadron of fighter bombers. Sergeant Morris Sampson, who had been a commercial artist from Chicago, described the incident in a letter he wrote, but never mailed due to security restrictions. Suddenly, the air raid siren sounded, and we looked up to see German planes coming straight for our position. The irony was almost comical. We had done our job too well. We dove for cover as they bombed our fake tank battalion. The explosion sent fragments of rubber and canvas hundreds of feet into the air. Afterward, we counted it a success. Better they waste their bombs on our inflatables than on real tanks and real men. The Ghost Army's influence extended to actual combat operations in unexpected ways. General George Patton, after being briefed on their capabilities in late 1944, incorporated elements of their deception techniques into his own tactical planning. During the relief of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, Patton used principles developed by the Ghost Army to create the impression of a larger force than he actually commanded. Captain William Flick, a liaison officer attached to Patton's headquarters, wrote in his official report, "General Patton grasped immediately the psychological advantage of making the enemy believe his forces were stronger than they actually were. He implemented a simplified version of our sonic deception techniques by having his limited number of tanks drive in circular patterns near German listening posts, creating the impression of continuous armored movement. He called it making a lot of noise with a little metal. The psychological toll of conducting deception operations created unique stresses for Ghost Army personnel. Unlike conventional combat units where success was measured in territory gained or enemy casualties inflicted, their effectiveness was inherently difficult to quantify. Lieutenant Ronald Beckman, who had been an architect in New York before the war, captured this sentiment in his personal journal. "We never know exactly how well we've succeeded. Did the Germans actually divert a panzer division because of our rubber tanks? Did our sound trucks save American lives by drawing fire away from real troops? We operate on faith that our deceptions are working, but the confirmation is always indirect, filtered through intelligence reports and prisoner interrogations. It's a strange way to fight a war, never actually engaging the enemy while constantly thinking about how to manipulate his perceptions. Despite the secrecy surrounding their operations, the Ghost Army occasionally received recognition from the conventional units they supported. After a particularly successful deception operation supporting the 84th Infantry Division in Belgium, the division commander sent a case of captured German brandy with a note that read simply, "To the phantom soldiers who made our casualties phantoms too." With gratitude, such moments provided rare validation for men who, by the nature of their assignment, could rarely see the direct impact of their work. Technical Sergeant Michael Romanoff, who had been a fashion illustrator before the war, wrote in his diary, "Most soldiers can point to a hill they captured or a town they liberated. Our victories are measured in battles that didn't happen and names that never appeared on casualty lists. It's a strange sort of satisfaction. As the Allied forces pushed into Germany in the final months of the war, the Ghost Army's operations took on added significance. German forces were increasingly dependent on a rigid command structure that relied heavily on signals intelligence and reconnaissance reports. This made them particularly vulnerable to the Ghost Army's multi-layered deceptions. Colonel Harold Steiner, an intelligence officer attached to Bradley's 12th Army Group, observed in a classified assessment, "The psychological impact of our deception operations increased as German command and control degraded. With fuel shortages limiting their ability to confirm reconnaissance reports through multiple channels, they became increasingly dependent on single-source intelligence, radio intercepts, aerial photographs, or civilian reports, which made them more susceptible to our phantom divisions. By March 1945, we estimate that up to 15% of German defensive deployments on the Western Front were responding to units that didn't actually exist. The Ghost Army's final major operation, supporting the crossing of the Rhine and subsequent advance into Germany, demonstrated how thoroughly they had refined their techniques. Their simulation of 2 divisions along a 10-mile stretch of the Rhine involved an unprecedented coordination of all deception elements. Captain Harold Lehner, who supervised the visual deception elements, detailed the operation in his after-action report. We positioned 96 inflatable vehicles, including tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces. These were repositioned every few hours to simulate normal unit movement. We constructed 3 fake headquarters complexes with appropriate signage and security measures. Vehicle movement was choreographed to create dust patterns consistent with major troop concentrations. The sonic program broadcast the sounds of pontoon bridge construction during the night, while our radio network generated over 800 fake transmissions simulating command traffic, logistics requests, and tactical communications. Local German civilians were allowed to observe certain activities from a distance, knowing they would report what they saw to German intelligence. The entire performance was designed to be observed, interpreted, and reported through multiple intelligence channels. The German response to this final major deception validated the Ghost Army's approach. German units, including elements of the 2nd Parachute Division and the 47th Volksgrenadier Division, were positioned to counter the Ghost Army's phantom crossing, leaving the actual crossing points significantly less defended. Prisoner interrogations later confirmed that German commanders had been convinced that the main Allied thrust would come precisely where the Ghost Army had created their elaborate illusion. Major General William Hogue, whose 9th Armored Division made the actual crossing at Remagen, later commented, "The ease with which we secured our bridgehead was directly related to the enemy forces that were distracted by ghost divisions elsewhere. These phantom soldiers saved thousands of real lives. As the war in Europe ended, the Ghost Army faced an uncertain future. Their specialized equipment was cataloged and stored in military depots, their operational reports sealed in classified archives. The unit was officially deactivated in September 1945, with its personnel dispersed back into civilian life with strict instructions never to discuss their actual wartime activities. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson, the unit's final commanding officer, addressed the men at their deactivation ceremony. "You are returning to a world hungry for war stories. Your friends and families will ask what you did in the war. You must remember that our operations remain classified at the highest level. The official record will show only that you served in a special troops unit attached to various headquarters elements. The full story of your extraordinary contributions may not be told for many years, if ever." This enforced silence created a curious disconnect for Ghost Army veterans as they reintegrated into civilian life. Arthur Shilstone, who resumed his career as an illustrator, later described the strange experience of attending art world gatherings where colleagues discussed their wartime service. Someone would talk about storming the beaches at Normandy, another about the brutal fighting in the Hurtgen forest. Then they'd turn to me and ask, "What about you, Arthur?" All I could say was, "I was with a special unit attached to headquarters." It sounded like I'd had a comfortable war far from danger, when in reality we'd often operated just miles from the front lines, deliberately drawing enemy attention. This inability to share their experiences created a unique form of post-war isolation for many Ghost Army veterans. Despite the secrecy surrounding their operations, the influence of the Ghost Army extended into post-war military thinking. Army planners studying the European campaign recognized the value of organized deception, leading to the establishment of permanent deception capabilities within the military structure. Captain Ralph Ingersoll, who had served as a planning officer with the Ghost Army, contributed to a classified 1947 study that concluded, "Strategic and tactical deception should be considered a fundamental element of all future military operations." The success of the 23rd Special Troops in creating the impression of forces, many times their actual size, demonstrates that relatively small investments in deception capabilities can yield disproportionate results in conservation of actual combat, power, and reduction of casualties. This assessment would influence the development of Cold War deception doctrines that remained classified for decades. The artistic talents that had made the Ghost Army so effective found expression in post-war American culture, though the connection remained largely unknown to the public. Bill Blass established himself as one of America's premier fashion designers. His experience creating camouflage patterns and understanding how forms are perceived informing his approach to clothing design. Ellsworth Kelly, who had studied camouflage principles and worked on visual deception, became a leading abstract artist whose work explored the relationship between form, color, and perception, themes directly connected to his wartime experience. Art Kane became a celebrated photographer whose innovative compositional techniques showed the influence of his work staging deceptive military tableaux. These and dozens of other Ghost Army veterans influenced post-war American visual culture in ways that could be traced to their unusual military service, though the specific connection remained obscured by continued classification. The techniques pioneered by the Ghost Army found their way into Cold War military operations, adapted for the nuclear age. The creation of dummy missile sites, false radar signatures, and deceptive communications became standard elements of strategic deception programs. A 1956 Strategic Air Command assessment, declassified in 2006, explicitly referenced the Ghost Army's methods. The principles established by the 23rd Special Troops regarding multi-channel deception, creating consistent false signatures across visual, electronic, and signals domains, remain foundational to effective strategic deception. The primary difference in the nuclear context is scale rather than methodology. This institutional memory of the Ghost Army's effectiveness ensured that their innovations survived long after the unit itself had disbanded. Occasional hints of the Ghost Army's existence emerged over the decades following the war, though comprehensive accounts remained prohibited by classification. A brief mention in a 1969 official Army history of World War II referenced special troops elements that conducted deception operations, though without specifics. A 1975 article in an obscure military journal discussed tactical deception units in the European theater in general terms. Veterans occasionally shared limited aspects of their experience, carefully avoiding classified details in local newspaper interviews marking war anniversaries. Ralph Ingersoll published a memoir in 1986 that made veiled references to deception operations but maintained the secrecy surrounding the unit's specific methods and operations. The continued classification of the Ghost Army's operations created frustration among aging veterans who wished to see their contributions recognized before they passed away. Victor Dowd, who had overseen much of the unit's visual deception work, wrote letters to the Army Historical Division in the 1980s requesting reconsideration of the classification status. "Most of us are now in our 60s, Dowd wrote. "The techniques we pioneered have undoubtedly been superseded by modern technology. Is there still justification for keeping our story classified?" The official response cited ongoing operational security concerns regarding deception methodologies as the reason for continued classification. It would take another decade before this position began to change. In the early 1990s, as Cold War tensions eased and military archives began a systematic review of World War II-era classifications, the Ghost Army's story began to emerge from the shadows. Fred Fox, a Ghost Army veteran who had maintained extensive personal notes despite security restrictions, became an advocate for declassification. "The Russians already know all about deception techniques," Fox argued in a letter to congressional representatives. "The only people who don't know what we did are the American public." His persistent efforts, along with those of other veterans and military historians, finally bore fruit in 1996 when the first substantial declassification of Ghost Army records occurred. Even then, certain operational details and specific techniques remained classified, with documents heavily redacted. This partial declassification allowed the first comprehensive accounts of the Ghost Army to reach the public. Martha Ellis Schaffner, a military historian specializing in World War II special operations, published the first authoritative article on the unit in a 1997 edition of Military History Quarterly. For over 50 years, one of the most remarkable American units of World War II has remained virtually unknown, she wrote. The story of how a small group of artists, designers, and sound engineers created an elaborate illusion that deceived the German High Command represents a unique chapter in military history. The article generated significant interest, leading to television documentaries, museum exhibitions, and increased recognition for the surviving veterans, many of whom were finally able to share their experiences publicly. The Ghost Army's legacy extended beyond military applications into broader cultural understandings of perception and deception. Professor Jonathan Merrill, a cultural historian at Princeton University, observed in his 2003 analysis. The Ghost Army represented a unique convergence of artistic creativity and military necessity. These artists brought perspectives from advertising, theater, and visual arts into the deadly serious business of warfare. Their success demonstrated that the principles of visual storytelling, sonic manipulation, and psychological understanding that drive effective advertising and entertainment could also determine the outcome of military campaigns. This cross-pollination between creative and military thinking remains relevant in an age of information warfare and perception management. For the veterans themselves, the declassification brought a bittersweet vindication. Many had passed away before their story could be fully told. Those who survived into their 80s and 90s finally received recognition for their unique contributions. John Jarvie, who had served as a sonic deception specialist and later worked in television sound production, spoke at a 2001 ceremony honoring the unit. For most of my life, I couldn't tell people what I really did in the war. My children grew up thinking I just had some administrative job at headquarters. Now they know their father helped save American lives by playing sound effects through loudspeakers. It's a strange legacy, but one I'm proud of. The ceremony included the presentation of a unit citation that had been delayed for over 5 decades due to classification restrictions. The full operational records of the Ghost Army, released through continued declassification efforts in the early 2000s, revealed the extraordinary scope of their achievements. Military analysts were able to assess the impact of specific operations through comparison with German military archives, which contained the enemy's response to the Phantom divisions. A 2005 Army War College study concluded, based on German deployment records and prisoner interrogations, we can now confirm that Ghost Army operations directly influenced the positioning of at least 15 German divisions throughout the campaign in Northwest Europe. This diversion of enemy forces from actual Allied operations likely resulted in the preservation of thousands of Allied lives and accelerated the defeat of Nazi Germany by deceiving and diluting German defensive capabilities at crucial junctures in the campaign. The techniques pioneered by the Ghost Army found their way into contemporary military doctrine, particularly in the emerging domain of information operations. U.S. Army Field Manual on Information Operations explicitly referenced the historical precedent. The multidisciplinary approach to deception demonstrated by specialized units in World War II, creating consistent false signatures across multiple intelligence collection methods, remains a foundational principle in modern information operations. While technology has evolved, the psychological principles exploited by these early practitioners remain constant. The integration of visual, auditory, and electromagnetic deception to create a compelling false narrative that influences adversary decision-making. The enduring fascination with the Ghost Army extended beyond military circles into broader cultural recognition. In 2013, legislation was introduced in Congress to award the Congressional Gold Medal to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, recognizing their extraordinary accomplishment through deception. Museum exhibitions featuring surviving equipment, photographs and artwork created by unit members toured the country. A feature film based on their exploits entered development. Rick Beyer, a documentary filmmaker who produced The Ghost Army for PBS, observed, "What makes their story so compelling is the unlikely combination of artistic creativity and military effectiveness. These were men who fought the war with inflatable tanks and sound effects, yet their impact was as real as any combat unit. They represent a different kind of courage, the willingness to draw enemy attention and fire through ingenuity rather than firepower." The personal stories of Ghost Army veterans revealed the human dimension behind the classified operations. Stanley Nance, who had been a commercial artist before the war and returned to advertising afterward, described a poignant moment during operations near Trier, Germany, in March 1945. "We had set up a fake artillery position complete with inflatable howitzers and amplified sound effects of guns firing. A group of German civilians, mostly women and children, came fleeing toward our position, terrified by what they thought was a massive American artillery battery about to open fire on their town. When they reached us, they fell to their knees begging for mercy. There we were with our rubber guns and sound trucks, unable to explain that the frightening artillery barrage they had been hearing was just a recording played through loudspeakers. I've never forgotten the look in their eyes, real fear created by our fake weapons. It brought home the human cost of war, even a war fought with deception. The Ghost Army's operations near the front lines placed them in genuine danger despite their non-combat role. During an operation supporting the 4th Armored Division near Mainz in March 1945, a Ghost Army sonic deception unit came under actual artillery fire from German positions that had detected their broadcast location. Sergeant Harold Dahl, who survived the incident, recalled, "Our speaker truck took a direct hit, killing 2 of our men and wounding 3 others. There was a terrible irony in it. We were playing recordings of artillery to deceive the Germans, and we died from real artillery. When people ask if we saw combat, this is what I think about. Our casualties may have been few compared to infantry units, but each one was a real soldier who died creating illusions." Such incidents underscored that despite their unusual mission, the Ghost Army operated in the same dangerous environment as conventional combat units. The records of the Ghost Army's final operations, conducted in the closing weeks of the war, revealed how thoroughly they had refined their techniques. By the spring of 1945, an operation supporting the U.S. Ninth Army's advance toward the Elbe River in April 1945 involved what military historians now consider the most sophisticated tactical deception of the European campaign. The Ghost Army simultaneously simulated elements of 3 different divisions across a 20-mile front, creating the impression of a major force preparing for a river crossing that would never occur. The deception incorporated over 40 inflatable vehicles repositioned multiple times daily to simulate unit movement, 9 distinct sonic programs broadcast from different locations, over 900 false radio transmissions, and elaborate physical deception, including dummy supply dumps, false headquarters installations, and manipulated vehicle tracks. German prisoner interrogations following this operation confirmed its effectiveness. A captured German intelligence officer, Hauptmann Werner Müller, stated during questioning, "We were convinced that at least 2 American divisions were assembling for a major crossing attempt north of Tangermünde. All available reconnaissance confirmed this assessment. Radio traffic, troop movements, supply buildup, even reports from civilian informants all indicated the same location. We repositioned our reserves accordingly." The actual crossing occurred 50 kilometers away, against minimal opposition, allowing the Ninth Army to establish a bridgehead with remarkably few casualties. The Ghost Army's Phantom divisions had once again drawn enemy forces away from the actual point of attack. The techniques and principles developed by the Ghost Army have found application far beyond military operations. In a 2010 analysis published in the Journal of Strategic Studies, Dr. Eleanor Wainwright traced the influence of Ghost Army methods through various domains. The multi-channel approach to creating credible deceptive narratives, pioneered by the Ghost Army, has influenced disciplines ranging from counterintelligence to corporate security, from film production to public relations crisis management. The fundamental insight that deception is most effective when consistently implemented across multiple sensing channels has proved applicable in numerous contexts where shaping perception is critical to success. This broader legacy represents an unexpected continuation of the unit's influence more than 6 decades after its deactivation. As the last living veterans of the Ghost Army entered their 90s, efforts to preserve their legacy intensified. The Ghost Army Legacy Project, established in 2013, worked to collect oral histories, preserve artifacts, and educate the public about the unit's unique contribution to victory in Europe. Project Director Rick Beyer explained, "Time is running out to capture these stories firsthand. Every Ghost Army veteran who passes away takes with him unique insights into this remarkable military unit. We're racing against time to ensure their contributions are fully documented for future generations." The project succeeded in recording dozens of oral histories from surviving veterans, creating a permanent record of personal experiences that official military documents could not capture. The 75th anniversary of D-Day in 2019 brought renewed attention to all aspects of the campaign in Northwest Europe, including the Ghost Army's contributions. A special exhibition at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans featured surviving examples of the unit's equipment, including a partially inflated dummy tank, sonic deception recordings, and artwork created by unit members during their deployment. Museum curator James Holland noted, "The Ghost Army represents the innovative American approach to warfare that characterized the campaign in Europe. Rather than simply overwhelming the enemy with superior numbers and firepower, Units like the 23rd Special Troops used creativity and psychological insight to multiply the effectiveness of available forces. Their story resonates with visitors because it's so unexpected. Artists and creatives using their talents to save lives rather than take them. Military planners studying the Ghost Army's methods in the context of 21st century information warfare have found surprising relevance in techniques developed for a very different battlefield. Colonel Margaret Chen, an instructor at the Army War College specializing in information operations, observed in a 2020 analysis. While the technology has evolved dramatically, the psychological principles exploited by the Ghost Army remain constant. Their fundamental insight was understanding that effective deception requires consistency across all intelligence collection channels, what we now call full-spectrum information operations. The holistic approach they pioneered, coordinating visual, acoustic, electromagnetic, and physical deception elements to create a compelling false narrative, remains the foundation of effective military deception in the information age. As technology has evolved, so too have the applications of principles pioneered by the Ghost Army. Modern military deception incorporates digital elements that would have been unimaginable in 1944, yet follows patterns established by these innovative World War II practitioners. Lieutenant Colonel James Baxter of the Army's Information Operations Command noted in a 2018 journal article, "Today's military deception planners work with digital signatures, cyber operations, and satellite imagery. Yet the fundamental methodology mirrors what the Ghost Army accomplished with rubber tanks and sound trucks. The objective remains the same, creating a believable alternate reality that influences adversary decision-making to friendly advantage. The medium has changed, but the message and psychological mechanics remain remarkably similar. The Ghost Army's legacy extends to questions about the nature of truth and perception in warfare. Military ethicist Dr. Thomas Reynolds observed in his 2016 book, Deception in Modern Conflict. The Ghost Army raises fascinating questions about the moral dimensions of deception in warfare. Their operations saved lives on both sides by preventing battles that would otherwise have occurred. Yet they achieved this through systematic manipulation of the enemy's perception of reality. This tension between beneficial outcomes and deceptive means remains relevant in discussions of information operations, psychological warfare, and the emerging domain of cognitive security in modern conflicts. For the families of Ghost Army veterans, the declassification of their operations brought unexpected insights into the wartime experiences of fathers and grandfathers who had taken their secrets to the grave. Elizabeth Sales, daughter of Ghost Army veteran William Sales, described the experience. "My father passed away in 1993, never having been able to fully share what he did during the war. When the declassification happened, I finally understood why he would smile mysteriously whenever World War II documentaries mentioned secret weapons. He was part of one of the most unusual weapons of all, an artistic weapon that saved lives rather than took them. I wish he had lived to see his contribution recognized, but I'm grateful that his grandchildren can now know the full story of his service." The legacy of the Ghost Army has continued to expand in the 21st century, particularly as military strategists reconsider the importance of deception in an era of information warfare. In a classified Pentagon assessment from 2021, later partially declassified, military planners explicitly referenced Ghost Army methodologies when discussing modern Russian and Chinese deception capabilities. While today's adversaries employ advanced technologies for creating false electromagnetic signatures and manipulating digital intelligence, the fundamental principles mirror those pioneered by the 23rd Special Troops, creating consistent deception across multiple intelligence collection domains. The rubber tank has been replaced by the false radar return, but the psychological mechanics remain identical. This assessment underscores how the Ghost Army's innovations continue to influence military thinking nearly 8 decades after their operations. The personal stories of Ghost Army veterans reveal a unique wartime experience that blended creative expression with deadly serious military objectives. Sergeant Gilbert Seltzer, who lived to the remarkable age of 106 before passing away in 2021, was among the last survivors who could share first-hand accounts. As an architect before the war, Seltzer had been recruited to help design the unit's fake military installations. "We understood spatial relationships and how objects appear from different distances and angles. Seltzer explained in a 2019 interview. We knew that perfect realism wasn't necessary. We just needed to create enough visual cues to be convincing from the distances at which German reconnaissance would observe our positions. It was theatrical set design applied to warfare. This architectural perspective proved crucial to creating convincing military tableau that could fool aerial observation. The Ghost Army's sonic deception capabilities represented one of their most technically innovative contributions. Recently declassified technical manuals reveal the sophistication of their approach to creating convincing battlefield soundscapes. Technical Sergeant Harold Flint, who had worked in radio sound effects before the war, developed a system of choreographed sound deployments that created three-dimensional audio illusions. We didn't just play recordings of tanks or trucks, Flint noted in a 1998 interview shortly before his death. We carefully positioned multiple speaker systems to create sonic movement across the landscape. If we wanted Germans to believe a tank column was moving from north to south, we would gradually reduce volume on northern speakers while increasing it on southern ones, creating the impression of vehicles in motion. We even calculated how sound would carry differently over various terrains and in different weather conditions. These techniques presaged modern spatial audio technologies by decades. The impact of Ghost Army operations on German decision-making has been further illuminated by continued research in German military archives. Historian Klaus Werner, examining reports from German intelligence units stationed opposite American forces in 1944-45, discovered numerous references to phantom divisions created by the Ghost Army. What's striking in these documents is how completely the deception was accepted. Werner noted in a 2017 paper published in the Journal of Military History, German intelligence reports confidently identified specific American divisions in locations where only the Ghost Army was present. These false identifications then formed the basis for German defensive deployments, allocating precious reserves to counter threats that didn't actually exist. The ripple effects influenced operations across entire sectors of the front. This documentary evidence confirms the strategic impact of the Ghost Army's tactical deceptions. The artistic legacy of the Ghost Army extended far beyond their wartime service. Many unit members returned to influential careers in American visual arts, bringing perspectives shaped by their unusual wartime experiences. Art Kane became a revolutionary photographer whose work appeared in Life, Vogue, and other major publications. In a rare 1994 interview discussing his wartime service, Kane explained the connection. In the Ghost Army, I learned that perception could be guided and manipulated through careful visual composition. A few well-placed visual elements could suggest an entire military unit to enemy observers. In my photography career, I applied similar principles, using careful framing and visual suggestion to create emotional impact with minimal elements. This economy of visual storytelling became a hallmark of Kane's influential photographic style. The declassification of Ghost Army records revealed surprising connections to other famous deception operations of World War II. Newly released documents confirmed that elements of the Ghost Army provided support for Operation Fortitude, the massive deception plan that convinced German High Command that the D-Day landings would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Captain Ronald Breckner, who served as a liaison between the Ghost Army and Chef, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, described this connection in a previously classified report. Our visual deception experts provided consultation on the construction of dummy landing craft and vehicle parks in southeast England, visible to German reconnaissance flights. While our unit was still training in the United States during the actual operation, the techniques we had developed informed the implementation of Fortitude's physical deception elements. This connection to one of the war's most famous deception operations underscores the Ghost Army's broader influence on Allied strategy. The Ghost Army's operations involved calculated risk-taking that placed them in genuine danger despite their non-combat role. Lieutenant George Goodwin, who commanded a visual deception platoon, described a particularly harrowing incident near Metz in November 1944. We had established a fake artillery position complete with inflatable howitzers and appropriate support vehicles. Our mission was to draw German counter-battery fire away from the real artillery supporting an infantry advance. We succeeded too well. The Germans launched a concentrated artillery barrage directly on our position. We had expected some fire, but the intensity was overwhelming. We lost 2 men killed and 5 wounded, with most of our inflatable equipment destroyed. As we took cover in foxholes, watching our rubber tanks shredded by shell fragments, the absurdity of our situation struck me. We had invited this devastation as our primary mission. Such incidents highlighted the real dangers faced by units engaged in battlefield deception. The psychological aspects of maintaining elaborate deceptions created unique stresses for Ghost Army personnel. Captain Edward Biao, who served as the unit's psychological welfare officer, documented these effects in reports that remained classified until 2010. Our men operate in a reality distortion field of their own creation, Biao wrote. They must maintain 2 simultaneous mental models, the actual tactical situation and the fictional scenario they are projecting to the enemy. This cognitive dissonance, sustained over months of operations, produces distinctive psychological effects including heightened states of alertness, occasional dissociative episodes, and what some men describe as reality vertigo when transitioning between genuine and deceptive operational contexts. Modern military psychologists studying these reports have noted similarities to stresses experienced by contemporary personnel engaged in information warfare and intelligence deception. The technical achievements of the Ghost Army extended to pioneering work in materials science. The inflatable equipment that became their most famous innovation required the development of specialized rubberized canvas that was lightweight, yet durable enough for field conditions. Technical Sergeant Morris Gilman, who had worked in industrial design before the war, supervised the refinement of these materials. The early prototypes were too vulnerable to puncture and tearing, Gilman noted in a technical report. We worked with rubber manufacturers to develop composite materials that could withstand field deployment while maintaining realistic appearance from observation distances. The resulting material technology had applications that extended beyond military use after the war, including in emergency shelters, temporary medical facilities, and eventually aerospace applications. This materials innovation represents another aspect of the Ghost Army's technical legacy that extended far beyond their immediate military mission. The Ghost Army's effectiveness relied heavily on understanding German intelligence collection methodologies. Lieutenant Walter Arnst, who had worked as an advertising psychologist before the war, conducted detailed analyses of German reconnaissance patterns that informed the unit's deception strategies. German military intelligence was methodical and thorough, but this predictability became their vulnerability, Arnst explained in a previously classified 1945 report. They followed regular schedules for aerial reconnaissance, radio direction finding, and patrol activities. Once we identified these patterns, we could ensure our deceptions were fully established during their observation windows and could be modified or repositioned during the gaps between their intelligence collection cycles. We essentially exploited the Germans' own procedural discipline to enhance our deception effectiveness. This systematic approach to counterintelligence represented sophisticated psychological warfare that belied the unit's artistic composition. The Ghost Army's influence extended to naval deception operations in the Pacific Theater, though this connection remained classified until recently. Documents released in 2018 revealed that techniques developed by the Ghost Army were adapted for use in the island-hopping campaign against Japan. Naval Commander Richard Herron, who had observed Ghost Army operations in Europe, established a Pacific deception unit that created phantom fleet elements to confuse Japanese naval intelligence about intended landing sites. The principles established by the 23rd Special Troops translated effectively to maritime deception, Herron wrote in a previously classified report. We created false radio networks simulating fleet communications, deployed dummy landing craft visible to aerial reconnaissance, and used sonic deception to simulate the acoustic signatures of ship movements. These techniques repeatedly induced Japanese commanders to allocate defensive resources to locations far from our actual landing objectives. This specific adaptation of Ghost Army methods demonstrates how their innovative approach to deception influenced operations globally. The cultural impact of the Ghost Army has grown as their story has become more widely known. The tension between art and war embodied in their mission has proven particularly compelling to contemporary audiences. Cultural historian Dr. Amanda Reynolds observed in her 2019 book, The Aesthetics of Deception, the Ghost Army represents a unique intersection of artistic creativity and military necessity. These artists applied their understanding of visual perception, spatial relationships, and symbolic communication to the deadly serious business of warfare. Their success demonstrated that artistic thinking could be as strategically valuable as conventional military approaches in certain contexts. This legacy challenges our tendency to separate creative and strategic thinking into distinct domains. This perspective has made the Ghost Army's story particularly resonant in educational contexts where interdisciplinary thinking is emphasized. The personal toll of maintaining operational secrecy for decades affected many Ghost Army veterans in profound ways. Richard Syracuse, who served as a radio deception specialist and passed away in 2011, described this experience in a 2005 oral history. For most of my life, I couldn't tell my family what I'd actually done during the war. My children grew up thinking I'd had some minor administrative role because that's all I could say. When my son was doing a school project on World War II and asked about my service, I had to be evasive. It created a distance I never wanted. After declassification, when I finally told them about creating phantom radio networks that fooled German intelligence, they were stunned. My grandson said, "Grandpa, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard." I broke down crying, realizing what I'd missed by not being able to share this part of my life. This emotional dimension of prolonged secrecy represents an often overlooked aspect of the Ghost Army experience. The technical documentation of Ghost Army operations has provided invaluable historical insight into the evolution of military deception. The unit maintained meticulous records of each operation, creating detailed after-action reports that assess the effectiveness of various deception techniques. These reports, only fully declassified in the past decade, reveal a process of continuous refinement based on observed results. Captain James Waldron, who served as the unit's operations analyst, developed systematic methods for evaluating deception effectiveness. We established multiple feedback channels to assess enemy response to our operations, Waldron wrote in a previously classified summary. These included aerial reconnaissance of German position changes, radio intercepts indicating command decisions, prisoner interrogations, and reports from resistance contacts. By correlating these inputs, we could determine which aspects of our deception were most convincing and which required modification. This analytical approach to refining deception techniques represented a surprisingly modern application of data-driven operational improvement. The Ghost Army's legacy in modern military education has expanded significantly in recent years. Since 2015, the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College has included a detailed case study of Ghost Army operations in its curriculum on information operations. Colonel Jennifer Martinez, who developed this educational module, explained its relevance. The Ghost Army demonstrates foundational principles that remain applicable in the information age. Their integration of multiple deception channels, visual, acoustic, electromagnetic, and physical, to create a coherent false narrative, anticipated modern concepts of full-spectrum information operations. By studying their methods, today's officers gain insight into both the technical and psychological dimensions of effective deception. The fact that they achieved such sophisticated effects with analog technologies makes their accomplishment all the more remarkable and instructive. This educational focus ensures that the Ghost Army's innovations continue to influence military thinking into the future. The Ghost Army's operations near the front lines occasionally brought them into direct contact with German forces, creating surreal encounters that highlighted the unusual nature of their mission. Private First Class Robert Tompkins described one such incident in the Hürtgen Forest in November 1944. We had established a fake command post complete with appropriate vehicle markings and radio transmissions. A small German patrol stumbled directly into our position during a foggy night. There was a brief firefight, and we captured 3 German soldiers. The look on their faces when they realized they'd been captured by a deception unit was unforgettable. Through an interpreter, one of them said, "We reported your division's headquarters location to our command yesterday. They won't believe we were captured by ghosts." We had to transfer them quickly to a regular POW facility to maintain our cover. But not before our German linguist convinced them they had discovered a top-secret American psychological warfare experiment that involved mind-altering radio transmissions. Their expressions as they were led away, genuinely frightened by this nonsense, confirmed that our deception skills worked. at the individual level as well as the strategic. Such personal encounters with the enemy underscored the psychological dimensions of the Ghost Army's operations. As the last witnesses to the Ghost Army's operations have passed away in recent years, the importance of preserving their legacy has intensified. In 2022, after years of advocacy by veterans' families and military historians, President Biden signed legislation awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops and the 3133rd Signal Company Special, recognizing their unique and highly distinguished service in conducting deception operations in Europe during World War II. The citation specifically noted that their actions saved lives by drawing enemy forces away from American units and greatly increased the effectiveness of Allied operations. This long-delayed recognition provided closure for the families of veterans who had never seen their contributions officially acknowledged during their lifetimes. The evolving understanding of the Ghost Army's significance has been shaped by changing perspectives on the nature of warfare itself. Military theorist Dr. Marcus Wilkerson observed in a 2020 analysis, "The Ghost Army anticipated the modern recognition that warfare occurs across multiple domains simultaneously: physical, informational, and cognitive. Their integrated approach to deception operated seamlessly across these domains, manipulating both physical reality through inflatable equipment and cognitive reality through calculated psychological effects." This multi-domain perspective represents their most enduring contribution to military thought. As warfare becomes increasingly defined by information operations and cognitive effects, the Ghost Army's pioneering work in these domains appears increasingly prescient. This theoretical framing places the Ghost Army at the forefront of an evolution in warfare that continues into the present day. The technical innovations pioneered by the Ghost Army have found applications far beyond military operations. The principles of sonic deception developed for battlefield application influenced post-war developments in acoustic engineering and spatial audio. Henry Kendall, who served as a sound engineer with the unit and later worked in commercial broadcasting, made explicit connections between these domains. The techniques we developed for creating convincing three-dimensional soundscapes with limited equipment directly informed my post-war work in broadcast sound design. The fundamental challenge was identical, using careful positioning and acoustic manipulation to create a convincing audio reality that existed only in the listener's mind. What began as a military necessity became the foundation for immersive audio experiences in entertainment and communication. This transfer of innovation from military to civilian applications represents another dimension of the Ghost Army's lasting impact. As historians have gained access to both Allied and German records concerning Ghost Army operations, the full strategic impact of their deceptions has become clearer. Military analyst Dr. Raymond Chen's comprehensive 2021 study cross-referenced Ghost Army operational reports with captured German military documents to assess the unit's effectiveness. The evidence indicates that Ghost Army operations directly influenced the deployment of German forces equivalent to approximately 3 to 4 divisions throughout the campaign in Northwest Europe. Given the severe manpower shortages facing German commanders in 1944-45, this diversion of forces from actual Allied operations significantly degraded German defensive capabilities at crucial junctures. Conservative estimates suggest that Ghost Army deceptions reduced Allied casualties by several thousand while accelerating the Allied advance by weeks at critical points in the campaign. This quantitative assessment provides concrete validation of the Ghost Army's strategic contribution to the Allied victory. The Ghost Army's success relied heavily on their ability to think like their adversary, anticipating how German intelligence would interpret the deceptive signals they created. Lieutenant Samuel Siskind, who had studied psychology at Columbia before the war, led a specialized analysis section that focused on understanding German intelligence methodology. We maintained detailed profiles of known German intelligence officers operating opposite our sectors, Siskind explained in a previously classified report. We studied their past reporting patterns, their known biases and blind spots, even their personal backgrounds when available. This allowed us to tailor our deceptions to exploit specific psychological tendencies. For instance, we knew certain officers gave disproportionate weight to radio intelligence over visual reconnaissance, so we would create especially robust radio deception when operating in their sectors. This sophisticated psychological approach anticipated modern techniques in adversary behavioral analysis and tailored information operations. The artistic documentation created by Ghost Army personnel provides a unique visual record of their wartime experience. Many unit members maintained sketchbooks and journals throughout their deployment, creating what amounts to an artist's eye view of the war. These materials, many only recently made available through family donations to museums and archives, offer extraordinary insight into how these artist soldiers perceived their unusual mission. Victor Dowd's battlefield sketches, now preserved in the National World War II Museum, show remarkable attention to the visual details that informed the unit's deceptions. The distinctive silhouette of American vehicles, the characteristic layout of command posts, the patterns of movement that signified military activity. Curator Robert Citino noted, "These sketches reveal a unique perspective. Artists analyzing warfare not just as a human experience, but as a visual composition to be reproduced for strategic effect." They were literally sketching the elements of deception they would implement. This artistic legacy provides a distinctive window into the Ghost Army's operational methodology. The Ghost Army's influence extended to civilian government agencies in the post-war period, particularly as Cold War tensions elevated the importance of deception capabilities. Declassified CIA documents reveal that veterans of the 23rd Special Troops were recruited to establish training programs in deception methodology for intelligence operatives. Harold Dahl, who had supervised visual deception operations in Europe, served as a consultant to the CIA's Office of Technical Services in the 1950s. A formerly classified training manual authored by Dahl explained the transfer of military deception principles to intelligence operations. The fundamental insight from our wartime experience was that effective deception requires consistency across all channels through which the target gathers information. Whether deceiving a military commander or a hostile intelligence service, this principle remains constant. Each deceptive element must support and reinforce all others to create a coherent false reality that the target will accept as genuine. This application of Ghost Army methodologies to Cold War intelligence operations represents another dimension of their lasting influence. The technical sophistication of the Ghost Army's operations is particularly impressive considering the limited technologies available to them. Recent analysis of their equipment and techniques by modern military deception specialists has highlighted how they achieved complex effects with relatively simple tools. Colonel Jessica Reeves, an instructor in information operations at the Naval War College, observed, with inflatable rubber, canvas, speakers, and basic radio equipment, they created deceptions that would require advanced electronic warfare systems, computer modeling, and specialized materials today. They compensated for technological limitations with meticulous attention to psychological principles and enemy perceptual patterns. Modern military planners, despite vastly superior technology, still study Ghost Army operations to understand the fundamental human and cognitive aspects of effective deception that transcend specific technologies. This perspective emphasizes that the Ghost Army's most significant innovation was conceptual, rather than purely technical, a way of thinking about deception that remains relevant, regardless of technological evolution. The Ghost Army story continues to resonate because it challenges conventional narratives about warfare, highlighting how creativity and psychological insight can be as decisive as firepower and maneuver. Military historian Dr. Thomas Fielding reflected on this aspect of their legacy in a 2023 essay. The Ghost Army reminds us that warfare has always been as much about perception and psychology as about physical destruction. These artist soldiers, working with inflatable tanks and sound effects, demonstrably influenced the strategic outcome of the campaign in Northwest Europe. Their success challenges us to reconsider the relative importance of different elements of military power and suggests that creative approaches to warfare may yield disproportionate results compared to their resource investment. As modern conflicts increasingly center on information and perception, the Ghost Army's example becomes ever more instructive. This philosophical dimension of the Ghost Army's legacy ensures their continued relevance in discussions about the evolving nature of warfare as the final chapter of the Ghost Army's story continues to unfold through ongoing historical research and increasing public recognition. Their legacy stands as a testament to American innovation and the unexpected ways that artistic creativity can be applied to meet the challenges of warfare. These artist soldiers, who once created phantom armies that fooled Hitler's forces, have themselves emerged from the shadows of classified history to take their rightful place in the narrative of World War II. Their unique contribution, using imagination and illusion rather than firepower to save lives and accelerate victory, represents a distinctive American approach to warfare that combined technical ingenuity, psychological insight, and artistic creativity. The rubber tanks that once drew Hitler's derision proved more powerful than he could have imagined, demonstrating that in warfare, as in art, perception often matters more than reality. The declassification of the Ghost Army's operations has finally allowed these artist soldiers to take their rightful place in military history. Their legacy lives on in modern military doctrine, where deception remains a crucial element of strategic planning. Museums now display their ingenious inflatable tanks alongside the artwork they created during their European campaign. What Hitler once dismissed as a laughable gimmick proved to be one of the most cost-effective weapons of World War II. A weapon made not of steel and explosives, but of canvas, speakers, and creative minds. The Ghost Army's story stands as a testament to the power of innovation and imagination in warfare, where the most effective deception isn't just about what the enemy sees, but what they believe they see. In the end, these artists didn't just create illusions. They saved countless lives on both sides by making war itself, in certain critical moments, nothing more than an elaborate performance staged across the battlefields of Europe. The end.